I often ask myself, what would the creepiest place in the world be? Wait, I don't. But I found it anyway. There is an island just on the outskirts of Mexico City called La Isla de las Muñecas, the Island of the Dolls. The island is located within a series of meandering swampy canals that are often considered a natural maze. The island itself is small, with only 1 acre of land and 3 small huts, as well as hundreds upon hundreds of decaying dolls, peppering the surrounding trees, bushes, and sometimes just hanging out in the open. Now, dolls of course don't just grow on trees. People put them there. The story of the Island of the Dolls goes back to the 1950s when a man named Julian Barrera lived on the island back when it was just a simple, overgrown refuge without any creepy dolls. One day, Julian was paddling along the canals towards his island. While the water in the canals today is murky, back then he noted the water was so clear that you could see the bottom. And floating in that crystal clear water, just by the dock of his island, was the body of a little girl. It's widely believed that the little girl was playing in the water nearby with her friends, when suddenly the current in the canal picked up and it took her farther downstream, where she eventually drowned. It was from this day onward that everything would change for Julian. Over the following weeks, Julian awoke in the early morning hours just before the sun rose to see a shadowy spirit roaming around his one-room hut in the surrounding island. On top of this, his crops that were once growing strong had started to wilt and die. Julian tried every method he could think of to maintain his crops, but still, his crops kept dying. Eventually, as the ghostly sightings and his crops got worse, Julian figured that the two events were interconnected. He believed that the spirit of the little girl he'd found was now haunting his island. So, in an effort to try and appease the supposed spirit, Julian put together a little makeshift shrine in the center of his little one-room hut. But night after night, the spirit kept coming back. Then one day, it's said that while Julian was by the water, a toy doll floated along the canal to his island. Seeing this doll flicked a switch in Julian's mind. In a final effort to protect himself from this supposed entity that was haunting his island, Julian began to place dolls all around the island. He did this with the hope that the spirit would be so distracted with these dolls that it wouldn't be interested in haunting him anymore. So, over the course of the next 50 years, Julian would place over 1,000 dolls all over the island in almost every place imaginable. He'd often collect them from anywhere he could, even the trash, and some dolls he hung up weren't even all in one piece. Taking in the whole scope of this story, it's important to note that Julian lived on the island completely alone. So some of the things he saw could be a result of some form of hallucinations and the psychological effects of being alone. Fast forward to modern day. In 2001, Julian Barrera died, but the events of his death are actually very interesting. He actually drowned in the canal right next to his island, but it's reported that he drowned in the exact same spot where he found the body of that little girl over 50 years before. Today, in 2022, the Island of the Dolls is managed by the great-nephew of Julian named Rogelio Santana, who often mentions still seeing ghostly shadows in the moonlight after dark, along with many tourists claiming to see the dolls moving and whispering in the darkness of the island. While Santana believes the island is still haunted, he doesn't, however, entirely believe the story behind the origin of the dolls, and why his predecessor Julian began collecting them in the first place. It was known to much of the Barrera family, as well as Rogelio, that Julian had some issues regarding his mental health, and his solitude on the island didn't exactly help with that. So there's a theory from Julian's family that he may not have actually found the body of the little girl himself, but he still, for some reason, associated her death with his island and the supposed hauntings for decades after that. However, that's all just speculation and we'll never really know for sure. What we do know for sure is that Julian felt the need to place over 1,000 decaying dolls all over his island, and that need is still very visible today, since all of the dolls Julian Barrera placed over the decades can still be seen today. When the current owner of the island, Rogelio Santana, was asked about who the island would pass to in the event of his death, he replied, "The ownership I leave to the dead." If I had a penny for every creepy doll found on this island, I would have 0 pennies, because the dolls aren't creepy, they're terrifying. Alright, if you enjoyed hearing about the island of the dolls, feel free to stick around. Alright, that's it for today. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. See you.